Thank you very much, and welcome to you all to the, I'm just going to move this a wee bit. I don't even need the microphone, I don't think, but I'll use it. This is going to be an entertaining night. This is going to be an inspirational night. Hopefully it's going to be an educational night for all of you. It's great to see so many people. It's great to see a standing room only audience here tonight. So thank you all for being here. I'm, of course, with Czech TV. I'm the anchor at Czech, but I'm not here in that capacity. I'm also on the board of directors at the Robert Bateman Foundation. So I'm kind of in that capacity as well. Has everybody been over? I hope you've been over to see the museum at some point. Have you? Yeah, isn't it fantastic? A celebration of Bob Bateman's work over the years. Now at the foundation, the gallery is fantastic, but the foundation is so much more than just the gallery. We want to do so much more than just what you see there. We are trying to breathe life into Bob Bateman's vision to create and enhance people's love and appreciation for nature. That's what we're trying to do, for an appreciation for our shared environment. Most of all, Bob Bateman wants kids to have that inspiration that you get when you go out into nature. I am pleased to tell you that this week, it was a big week for the Bateman Center. The very first group of students came to the Bateman Center this week as part of a new provincial curriculum where kids are allowed to study wildlife, art, and nature. The kids can study 3 different areas. This is all brand new. Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, we are excited about it. The kids can study 3 different subject areas as part of this new curriculum. They can study birds, BC animals, or the art itself. And in the coming months, 40 more classes. And remember, this is our first year. 40 more classes are going to be able to experience the same program. And it is all, get this, it is all free. Free for the students, free for the schools. It is paid for by the Bateman Foundation through people like you, through generous donors and sponsors who have the same vision. So thank you for everybody who's helped with this program. So we are very excited about it. The whole excitement that we have is we're trying to do what Bob has asked us to do. And it is, if we are going to get good public policy decisions in the future, good decisions that enhance our environment, that keep our nature pure and the way that's why we live here, it begins with kids. You got to get kids involved. Get them off their gadgets, off their iPhones for a little while, get them out experiencing nature, and that is what we are trying to do with this program. So there's the plug for the Bateman Foundation. Now we're getting on to tonight's agenda. Tonight really has been it's almost 60 years in the making. 60 years in the making. 2 childhood friends who would go on to impressive careers themselves. Of course, we all know Robert Bateman, the Ontario teacher, who would go on to become one of the world's finest wildlife artists. Bristol Foster, who is an accomplished biologist himself, who would come on to head this institution, this museum that we are in today. This man headed it. So they have very impressive careers. I had dinner with these 2 gentlemen earlier, last year, and they are characters. You're going to hear some of their stories. They're kind of like an old married couple, to be honest with you. I know. Bob would start a sentence, and Bristol would finish it. Bristol would start a story, and Bob would correct it. Right? So it was an entertaining night. It was complete with rich stories of their adventure. 2 guys in their 20s who would embark on an around-the-world trip. And we're going to hear some of those stories. Africa, India, Southeast Asia, Australia. Get this, 53,000 kilometers through rivers, through swamps, through bush, through jungle. It's an incredible adventure. They did it with one traveling companion, though, a specially designed Land Rover that they named Grizzly Torque. Tonight we're going to hear some of those stories. We're going to see some of Bristol's 16 millimeter film that he shot at the time. course, we're going to hear from the two gentlemen at the center of it. Of course, there's the one missing link, the Land Rover. What happened to the Land Rover? Well, I can tell you Bristol has been searching for 2 years for that Land Rover. They found 3 Land Rovers, very similar, on, of all places, Salt Spring Island, in their backyard. But it wasn't the Grizzly Torque. Then, through the magic of the internet and a healthy dose of good luck, the Grizzly Torque was discovered. It was found. It was rotting in a farmer's field in Williams Lake. Yes, but then it was purchased by a man who's in our audience tonight. It is now being refurbished by another man who is in our audience tonight, and it is going to be ready when this exhibit is finally complete in May. The Land Rover will be the piece de la resistance in that exhibit. The exhibit, of course, as you can see, is called The Rover Boys. Here's a sample of what you're going to see and hear both tonight and in May when the exhibit begins.
And I was sitting in the bathtub, but I can remember very clearly looking at my toes, and I can remember the taps and everything, and what am I going to do now? I don't want to go back to school again so soon. And suddenly this idea popped in my mind, well, maybe drive around the world. And, well, who would I go with? I didn't want to go alone, and took very few moments before I thought, well, Bob. Yeah, Bob Bateman, of course. He's an artist and a geographer. It would be perfect for him.
Bristol phoned me one Sunday afternoon and said, how would you like to go around the world in a Land Rover? I said, ha 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 ha.
He said, well, maybe.
He said, I'll phone you back next week. If you can think of 5 good reasons why we won't go, then I'll accept them.
So a week later he phoned up and he couldn't think of any reasons why he didn't want to go driving around the world.
Job. I didn't have a wife. I didn't even have a girlfriend. I didn't have anything that would tie me down.
1957. Think of the world back then.
Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you all for coming. I'm wearing, this is the same jacket as you just saw in that initial picture of me. That was me, in case you didn't recognize me. That jacket has been around the world, and I think it's changed less than I have since 1958. And Bristol gave me the jacket. As Birgit knows, and wife Birgit knows, and everybody who knows us knows, Bristol's made a gigantic difference in my life. He not only gave me this jacket and the trip around the world, which I'll dwell on a little bit, that I think it was his trip and his idea. Also, he's the reason we're in British Columbia. He was living in BC. Birgit and I kept coming to visit him with the kids. The kids have all grown up with Bristol. And we were living in Ontario. And there's nothing worse than an ex-Torontonian who's moved to British Columbia. They have this attitude, if you could be living in paradise, why are you still living in purgatory? And he didn't actually say that, but we could tell this was the place for us. And so that's how we ended up on Salt Spring Island, and Bristol's on Salt Spring Island too. By the way, part of the introduction could have been, yes, he was indeed the director of this museum when it was in its just as it started, when it was the building you see now, after the little Clifford Carl building. And after that, he became director of ecological reserves for British Columbia. So most of the ecological reserve in British Columbia, Bristol would be responsible for. So he's a pretty important guy. And this trip around the world, I credit him with doing all the work. His dad bought the Land Rover, and then we paid depreciation on it. He did all the kind of technical stuff, the insurance and all that kind of stuff. And as you can see, there's the picture of the trip around the world. I won't take time to rhyme off all the different countries, but you can see, we sat down one Sunday afternoon in Toronto. We both got to know each other, by the way, at the Royal Ontario Museum, at the Intermediate Field Naturalist Club. That's how we became friends when we were teenagers. And we sat down one Sunday afternoon with a school atlas and said, we want to do Equatorial Africa, Northern India, Burma if possible, Thailand, Malaya, not Malaysia, and then Australia, and then back. I was a high school teacher. I took 1 year off plus the 2 months, so it was a 14-month trip. We planned the budget that afternoon as well. It was $2,000 each for the entire trip, counting all of the passages on the ocean. But we didn't stay in a hotel once. We stayed in our Land Rover. It was our home away from home. I think if I push this, yes, that's me at the rail on my way across the Atlantic. Bristol had gone on ahead and went to the Land Rover factory and took a course in how to take apart a Land Rover and put it together again. And so he was a brilliant mechanic as well. I remember you might see one stop in the movie where we stopped for a day while he took the steering rod out and banged it straight on a cement bridge and put it back in again. So he orchestrated most of the things. So that's me dreaming about Bristol or something on that trip. This is the Land Rover in Scotland. We decided to take it up to Scotland to the Cairngorm Mountains and drive around in it to see if anything would fall off or it would break or was faulty then, because it was brand new. It was an ambulance body, and you can see me with the same coat actually sticking my head out of the hatch in the roof. This is still in Scotland. The back view, you see the 2 beds, Dunlop pillow mattresses, absolutely sheer comfort for the whole trip. We carried 5-gallon polythene, as they call it there, polyethylene jug for water, and we didn't get sick at all on the whole trip. And the little compartments for the stoves and that kind of thing. We sailed from Liverpool to Takoradi in Ghana on a freighter with 12 passengers. And every day, of course, as I still do every day, I'm out there painting. This time I was doing plein air painting or field painting of waves, studying the waves. And I think you can, maybe you have to click it harder. There we go. Ooh, back up. No, yes. Okay. So this, learning the physics of the waves, you can tell which way the wind is going, and you can see at the top there a little Wilson storm petrel. Landing in Takoradi, they did, in those days, I'm not sure what they do in Ghana now, somebody in the audience would know. Everybody went ashore by these canoes with those trident paddlers, and for the Land Rover and other vehicles, they just put 2 canoes together and put planks in between and hauled the Land Rover out on a cable out of the hold and dropped it down, hoping it would hit the planks right. And then they paddled it ashore, and they put down 2 planks so we could drive the Land Rover up the beach, or Bristol could. Guess I have to push. There we are. Everywhere we went around the world, I painted a little painting along the sides of the Land Rover for each country. The paintings lasted until the first winter in Toronto. I don't know if you know, in Toronto they put salt on the roads in the wintertime, and the paint just kept all peeling off, and so Bristol repainted the whole thing. We hope when we restore it, I hope to redo the paintings in original oils and have them as part of the showpiece of the Grizzly Torque, as we called it. The name came from Pogo, by the way, but we don't know why Walt Kelly had that word Grizzly Torque. Here we are. We always had an audience. That's a mosquito netting across those back doors. And everywhere we went, of course, we were the first time they had a show like this come near their walk going into their village. We always had a group of people, no matter what continent, to gather around the back of the Land Rover. You can see a new face. That's not, you can identify Bristol probably on the left, but that's not me on the right. That's Eric Thorne, who is a Victoria guy. He grew up in Victoria. He used to hang out in the old museum with Clifford Carl. There's Clifford Carl Hall here. I went out west with Eric on a Greyhound bus from Toronto to Victoria back in the old days, the Clifford Carl Museum. I remember sleeping down in the basement. We got free accommodation in the basement among the big tubs of formaldehyde sharks. So we inhaled formaldehyde every night. We were sleeping in the basement here. Eric then went with me over in 1954 over to tour Europe. He's an artist and a naturalist as well, from, as I say, the Royal Ontario Museum. And he left the Royal Ontario Museum. He's working at the British Museum, but he took off 4 months to do the Africa bit with us. So you see Eric sitting there at the back of the Land Rover and me doing the cooking. Since the Land Rover belonged to Bristol's dad, he did all the driving. He said if anybody's going to prang it, it's going to be him and not me. So he did 100% of the driving, and I did virtually 100% of the cooking. I'll describe the menu. It's the same every night for 14 months. It was, Bigger will tell you I'm a connoisseur. You take a tin of Argentine corned beef, and you've previously started to fry onions in a bit of cooking oil, and then you throw in the Argentine corned beef and mix it all up, and you get corned beef hash. Then meanwhile, we've got a pressure cooker, pressure cooking rice, and when the rice is done, we throw in a can of peas. Raise your hands if you love canned peas. Oh, there are 3 hands. I love canned peas, I still do. Bigger can't stand them. And I know David Reeser can't either. And that was dinner. Lunch was basically white bread, bananas, and peanuts, and breakfast was oatmeal mush, but no milk or cream. We didn't have refrigeration, of course. You could see, by the way, in the background, a log we were chopping through. That was just a minor thing, obstacle going across the highway across Africa. I found that by the time I was kind of finished with Ghana and Togo, Dahomey, and Nigeria, my mind, this happens to all of us, I was not being mindful. I was thinking about the road was bumpy. I was thinking about the bumps and my belly and my back and no bath. So bumps and belly and bath and back were what I was thinking about, and I was not paying attention. And Africa was passing me by. I said, Bateman, you idiot. You're spending all this money, $2,000, taking a year off teaching. You could have stayed in a hotel in Toronto for less money than that in those days, and you're not paying attention. So I got a sketchbook and started my sketchbook partway along, and this is a page from it. And then because of my geography training, part of my religion is vive la différence. That's what's good about the planet Earth. Variety is not only the spice of life, it is life. And the one thing I lament about the way we're going in the 21st century is everything is becoming homogenized, monotone. So every time I saw a different house type, dog type, face type, tattoo type, dress, et cetera, village type, I would try to record it in my sketchbooks. And these will be on display on the forthcoming show at the Bateman Center. You can see the Land Rover there under a big baobab tree. Okay, push harder and longer. Is somebody standing in front of the computer? There. I hope that's the next one. I wasn't paying attention. Do we skip one? That's the next one. Congo River. This is the way I was painting in those days. I had no idea I was going to be a realist. I certainly didn't have any idea I was going to be an artist anybody ever heard of. I always knew I'd be an artist, but I didn't think anybody would have ever heard of me. And I was heading toward abstraction. This was my Emily Carr phase. I'm quite proud of it. I think it's kind of Carrish, if I can be so bold as to brag. And I painted it on location in the Congo River. You can see the little canoe down at the bottom. Now, I obviously don't have time to tell all the stories, so I've selected a few stories that are highlights. This is one that was a highlight, and this was visiting the pygmies, which are more properly called the Bambutis. They think of pygmy would be an insulting word. Bambuti. Incidentally, on this trip, and Bristol would agree with me, I've never felt so free in my life, because we had obviously there was no iPhones or anything like that, but no phones to ring, no appointments. We could stay in a place for 5 seconds and take a picture, or 5 minutes, or 5 hours, or 5 days. We could just make up our minds spontaneously. Okay, this is nice, we'll stay here for 5 days. And that's what we did with the pygmies in the Turi forest of the eastern Congo, which I don't even want to go there now if you know what's going on there in the eastern Congo. It's one of the most nightmarish places on the planet. But in those days it was beautiful. And these are among the most beautiful people that I've ever heard of. And we were there for 5 days. Colin Turnbull, who subsequently wrote a book on the Bambuti, was getting his MA from Oxford, studying them, so we were in luck. He could talk to them and tell us about them. They live in these little huts that takes them just about an hour and a half to build. And they hunt everything that's easy. They don't scrape the bottom of the barrel like we do with our draggers and all that kind of thing. They just hunt what is easy, gathering honey and hunting and roots and berries and things. And then as soon as it gets to be a little bit harder, they move on and leave lots left over for next time. And they move through the forest. And these people have no mental illness. They have no politics. They have no leaders or rulers. All their songs are hymns of praise and celebration of the forest. They just seem to be among the most ideal human beings I've ever heard of, with none of the problems that seem to be getting worse in our society. And I included them. Yep, so this is a sketch of them. They're about, a full-grown man would come just about up to my Adam's apple. Now they're of course extinct as a people. Nope. That's interesting. Don't tell me you have technical. It went smoothly before. The Colin Turnbull, in chatting with them, organized a net hunt. They wondered if we wanted to go on a net hunt with them. They do have sort of little bows and arrows, but they're not great at big game. But little game, like little diker antelopes and so on, they're okay at. So the best place to do the net hunt was in some forest a bit ways away. So we said, they said, can we get a ride in your Land Rover? And so we started, you'll see this in the movie, we started packing them into the Land Rover. How many did we get in the Land Rover, do you think? About 50. He's coming to the stage because we're going to do a duet. At the same time as we were there with Colin Turnbull, there was a guy from the University of Ohio State, a musicologist studying their music. Their music is incredibly complex. He described it as polyphony, which is a lot like our medieval music, and they sung it in rounds in many, many different layers to their singing, and all their songs were hymns of praise to the forest. And so you see they're all singing. That's a drawing I did for the Toronto Telegram. We did periodic articles there. That's Eric in the middle, and you can see Bristol at the wheel. And so Bristol starts out. This is going to be a round. I hope we don't louse it up. Okay. You're on.
Hey, Kumancha,
Hey, Kumancha, boy, oh boy. Hey, Kumancha, boy, oh boy, a boba. Hey, Kumancha. Anyway, that's enough. Thanks, Dad. Okay, and here's the hunt where they string the homemade nets out at low from the ground up to about waist height through the trees, and the women and children mostly go a long ways around, and they drive the animals, making yelling and yodeling and songs, and their calls tell what's in the hut. They did catch one little forest antelope. Then the other adventure in Africa I'm going to talk about was the Ruwenzori Mountains. These are sometimes called the Mountains of the Moon, and these are the headwaters of the Nile. The drips that drip off the glaciers there end up theoretically in the Mediterranean at Alexandria. And so, by the way, Kenya was a colony. The Congo was the Belgian Congo. It was still colonial when we did this. It's a different world. And Uganda was a protectorate, so it was British run. And the Uganda Alpine Club told us how to get us set up with porters to climb up the Ruwenzori Mountains, and they were carrying our gear. So there you can see we're getting organized to go up. And one thing I have to mention, this is Bristol's hand holding garlic. One of Bristol's characteristics, Libby, does he still eat raw garlic? Yeah. Is popping raw garlic like other people pop peanuts into their mouth. It's extremely healthy. You can talk to Bristol afterwards. He can give you the full lecture on garlic. And he kept popping garlic all the way around the world, chomping away on garlic. It was readily available. And after a while, the whole vehicle smelled like garlic, and Bristol smelled like garlic. It comes out your pores eventually. And so I had to say that as a background to this next one. So here we are headed out. The lowest level of the layer was elephant grass, as you can tell, growing maybe 10 feet high. I was in the lead there, I think, just for photography, but normally everybody else seems to be able to walk faster than I do, including Birgit. And I was always behind, and the porters were way ahead, and Eric and Bristol were ahead of me, and sometimes they got way ahead of me. Maybe I'm stopping to take a picture, and we come to a fork in the trail, like Yogi Berra says, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. But I didn't know which one to take, and I couldn't hear them, and they were gone. It could have been lost for wasted days, heading off where the elephants had made a trail, because they were the same as our trails. So do you know what I did? I walked up the two different choices and sniffed. That's right. The one that smelled like garlic was the one that I took. The thing about the Ruwenzori Mountains, being isolated almost on the equator, there's no other warm weather or warm climate plants that have evolved for that. So they have plants in cold atmospheres, sometimes snows, but they've evolved from warm weather plants that would be found around. And so they tended to go to giantism. Sorry, I'm still thinking in feet, but our bracken fern was 12 feet high. Raspberry canes were 10, 12 feet high. And these are senacios and lobelias. Senacios are like little hens and chickens, little garden plants that you have. They're about that big here in Victoria. And lobelias, cardinal flowers of lobelia, and they generally grow that high. Can you see Bristol in the middle of that picture at the bottom? Those are giant plants. Next, I'm in charge. So we got up to the glacier level at 12,000 feet, and we staged a snowball fight. We had a little contract with Life magazine to have first refusal on our trip for an article, and they paid for all the film and processing and everything, but they did refuse because it already had Arthur Godfrey had just done a trip almost the same as our trip, and they figured it'd be repetitive. So anyway, we staged a snowball fight. Not many people can say they had a snowball fight on the equator. And we chased big game in big game country in Africa. And since everybody knows all about big game in Africa, that's all I'm going to do in Africa. Moving along, we crossed on a 2,000 passenger Indian passenger ship going from Bombay to Mombasa, stopping in at the Seychelles briefly. And we were traveling third class. It was relatively cheap. They had the Land Rover in a cage in the room. I think you'll see it in the background here. Yeah, there's the cage. And we just climbed over the cage, and anybody could actually. And other people, it was like a big stateroom with like 150 people. I'd say 95% were, you say Sikhs, but most people say Sikhs, but they call themselves Sikhs. They're going back to India, as you know. They're back and forth. There was a lot of Indian people working in East Africa and living there. And so they were going supposedly home. So the ship was full of Sikhs. We ate their third-class meals, which were wonderful. And here we are the first night in our Land Rover down in the hold. And we had visitors, as usual, every time we opened the door. And I have to tell you a little small world story. To me, it's my best small world story. right at this moment. So Bristol had gone to sleep after he took this flash picture of me, and I was in my bed asleep. The onlookers had gone away, and I heard a little tap on the window, and it was the ship's first officer wearing his white uniform with the hat with the gold braid all around and so on. He had very dark skin. He was a Brahmin, but he was a brilliant young, he was only in his 20s. He read Schopenhauer in the original German and Sartre in the original French. I've hardly ever hung out with somebody who was so well read and so brilliant and a great conversationalist. And we chatted on and on for maybe half an hour, maybe longer, about sex and politics and religion, you know, the usual things. And after half an hour, he said, "You're from Southern Canada, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I am. I'm from Toronto." He said, and I said, "Well, how can you tell?" He said, "I can easily tell by your accent." And I said, "Well, I don't think Southern Canada has a different accent from Northern Canada." He said, "Oh, actually, I only know one other Canadian. He's from Northern Canada. He's from Ottawa." So, okay. I said, "Well, they do talk kind of funny in the Ottawa Valley." So that may be understandable. So now he knows two Canadians. And just more as a joke, he said, "Maybe you know him." I went to high school with him. His name was Wes Huxtable. And he met him through Baha'i. That was the connection. But can you believe it? Here we are in the middle of the Indian Ocean. He knows two Canadians. We went to high school together. What the smart people did, and this was the majority of the six, was to, as soon as they got on board, they didn't sleep in those three-tiered steel bunks, which you bring your own mattress. They got all their gear up on deck where it was nice and airy, because the Indian Ocean was a little stuffy below. Didn't smell particularly. The babies kept waking up, which was in the middle of the night, which wasn't too peaceful. So they would plant mama or mother-in-law or somebody with all their gear and claim a bit of deck. Bristol and I were too late to do that, but we carried our gear up to the anchor change, which is the only bit of deck available, and slept there every night crossing the Indian Ocean, out under the stars. And this is a painting I did. I developed a quick technique. I don't think I'm an elegant painter or drawer, but I'm quick. I'm fast. And you can see where I scribbled the main thing with ballpoint, and then I wet the page, and then I work on it. When the page is dry, then the painting's finished. So this is a mother and a couple of kids on deck. Another mother doing her daughter's hair. And obviously this is what you think it is, Taj Mahal, arguably the most beautiful building in the world. This is from one of my paintings in the book Birds, but that's what Taj Mahal looks like from far away from the Red Fort. And this shows you how the world has changed. We, of course, visited the Taj Mahal. We drove into the parking lot. The parking lot was empty. Probably a number of you have been to the Taj Mahal. Birgit and I have been back a few times. And well, I don't even think there is a parking lot now. It's just jam-packed with people. You have to do big lineups. It's just throngs and crowds and hawkers and everything. There, we had the whole parking lot to ourselves. It was a full moon. We saw sunset, wandered. There was no guards, no tickets. Wandered all around under the main dome of Taj Mahal by moonlight. Saw the moonlight coming through. Went back again at dawn. And since we're still all alone, I had the temerity, since I had nobody except Bristol to hear me, I'm going to sing again, to try to sing. I don't have perfect pitch, but let's pretend I'm singing a C chord, C-E-G-C. So here I am standing under the dome of Taj Mahal, and I went, la, 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 la. And then and the echo just keeps coming back and overlapping. It's just like the Mormon Tabernacle Choir if they were all drunk. Crossing the Ganges was a bit of an issue. They may even still do this. A lot of India isn't much different now than it was in 1958, but of course a lot of India is different. They were still pulling barges along the canal manually, but there's no bridge to get to Nepal. And so what we did, and this is another one of these drawings I did, back, don't tell me, there, yeah. We got one of those primitive boats, put two planks up and drove onto the boat, made sure you stopped in time. It's just the right wheelbase, width of the boat was a wheelbase for the Land Rover. and the boat had a bit of a sail, and there's a little man at the back with a pole. It's very shallow and sandbanks, and he pulled us, took a long time, pulled us across the Ganges, and then we could carry on. Yes, that's better. That's the picture you saw on the screen. And that's the same coat, as I just said. We camped at the height of land in the dark, not realizing we'd be in the middle of this beautiful rhododendron forest, in the background seeing Kanchenjunga and the whole scope of the Himalayas before we headed down into the Kathmandu Valley. I did this painting later when I got back to Toronto as a gift to Bristol's parents. We're not like an old couple, even though I sometimes call Bristol Birgit. I don't know if I ever called Birgit Bristol. I hope not. Bristol, someone pointed out Bristol looks like he's doing something else there, but he's not. You're totally wrong. Get your minds out of the gutter. So that's what it was like. Just like these rhododendron forests, like thousands of bunches of roses. And Kanchenjunga, I think we could see K2 there too. Prayer flags. Part of my sketchbook for Nepal. The bottom sketches are right in Kathmandu. They're what are sometimes called the erotic temple. It's full of all kinds of full-color tableaus of how you do it in groups, and doubles are never less than two, obviously, but there's tableaus and all kinds of imagery and symbolism. I was too shy to even begin to take detailed photographs of it, and I didn't do any detailed sketches. But some village girls from, they're there. Some village girls came and they were looking at it, and they were not too shy to look at them. They thought they were very funny. I didn't think they were funny. Interesting, almost impossible, but not funny. And continuing on with the paintings, you can see India, Nepal, Sikkim. When we were in the Belgian Congo, this Colin Turnbull, who did the pygmies, said, if you're going to India, you have to go to Sikkim. And if you go to Sikkim, you have to make sure you look up the Crown Prince, the Raj Kumal, the Crown Prince. He's a friend of mine. In fact, I'll give you a letter of introduction. So we did, so we did. We drove up the driveway. We got our white nylon shirts out from underneath the mattress. Anybody old enough to remember how those nylon shirts stank? Anyway, and our jackets and pants from under the mattress too, and put them on and went in and met the prince. And he had us for tea and then drinks in the evening. He hadn't yet married Hope Cook, who became the other American princess other than Princess Grace, who he then subsequently married. And we asked him when we were there, because it's right on the border of Tibet, could we go drive up the road to the border of Tibet? And he said, I hope you don't. On the way, sorry. On the way and that's it, yeah. On the way, we went through Darjeeling, and some of you have been there, I'm sure. And here's the tea pluckers, and they only pluck the top two leaves in the bud. That's where they always do tea. And that's one of the tribal women's, and there's a close-up of another one from that area, very beautiful. And the Crown Prince let us wander around the palace the next morning, take all kinds of pictures, and somewhat chat with people, but hardly anybody could speak English except him. And then this is the road to Tibet. He said there's one place 12 miles from the border where you can back off and turn around. If you go beyond there, you'll have to go to the border, and I will get in trouble. That was 1958. The Dalai Lama was still in Tibet for one more year. He escaped the next year. And the Chinese were swarming all over the place, and he said, I could have an incident, and I could get in trouble. The Chinese will think I've got American spies here. And so this is taken from that one place, and it was just like going back to the days of Genghis Khan. The mule trains were still moving freely out of Tibet and down into Sikkim to trade with Indian traders. And you can see they really haven't changed since the days of Genghis Khan. Those are the boots they wore, swords and silver scabbards. And we camped one night down by the river where they were camping, and did a modus operandi, which I'm going to come to in a moment, whereby I would get out of the Land Rover. Of course, driving a Land Rover up and parking it would attract attention because they'd never seen anything like that before. Then I would get out and sit near the Land Rover and start doing a painting. And then people would come around to see what I was doing, and then that broke the ice. So I had a number of muleteers come, and this was one of my favorite paintings. You can see the silver scabbard on the ground. Then we took a trip by ship from Calcutta to Rangoon on a Japanese freighter. Here's Bristol in a Japanese bath, up to his neck. That was April 2nd, I guess. And here are some, yes, I sketched these on location from the ship as we went into Rangoon Harbor. Now, this modus operandi that we had by then, as it was already mentioned, Bristol was shooting 16 millimeter movies, which was the state of the art back then. He had a Bolex and a tripod and everything. And he was going to take the movies when he got them edited on an Audubon screen tour. Remember, this is the 50s, before the wonderful world of Disney and all that kind of stuff was really going. It was very popular to have people like Bristol go around to high school auditoriums, and everybody in the town of Brantford or Ladysmith or whatever would come to the high school to see the Audubon screen tour of that particular month. And so he went all over North America showing the Rover boys roving 3 continents. So here's how it was kind of the secret to breaking the ice. I would get out, as I said, and start doing a painting of the village. The story I'm about to tell you was in Burma. And then pretty soon the kids would look at me and I'd smile and wave and go on with the painting. They would gather around. And when the adults saw the kids were okay, got to have kids first, I would do the kids first. And I got this method where I could just wet the page, slap on the main, starting with that beige color, the brownish color, getting the main form, and end up with black with a finer brush. And when the paper was dry, I was finished. It would literally take 5 minutes, maybe 10, to catch the essence of the kids. And then the adults would come around seeing the kids were okay, and I would start doing the adults. Somehow I'm not doing a good job, but there's an adult. That's all you need to know. And this was one of the most memorable night evenings of my life. This was an elegant lady, and I had her, as soon as everybody could tell I was targeting a person, they could see I was looking up at that person, and they would all look at the painting. Sometimes they were making sarcastic comments, not in the case of the lady, but that guy, oh, you really got his nose right, that kind of thing, only in their language. So she posed very calmly and sweetly, and then she walked away, and by then everybody had left. The sun had gone down. It was beautiful golden dusk, and I had started painting this little girl because I was interested in her hairdo, so it's just me and the little girl. And I could hear gales of laughter coming from the village about 100 yards away. And I thought, well, Bristol's acting like a clown again in the village, and I'm missing out on it. Finally, I finished doing the little girl and showed her, and she nodded very seriously. Then she turned on her heels and scampered to the village. I followed her into the village. It wasn't Bristol. He was talking to a priest, it turned out, getting his stories. What was happening in the middle of the village, just picture this. These villages are absolutely beautiful. No tin roofs, no Coca-Cola signs, beautiful woven walls, clean, sandy main street in the village. And everybody in the village, in the main street, was having a tug-of-war, a great big rope, men against the women. And the women were winning because they have a lower, is this politically incorrect, a lower center of gravity. Anyway, they were dragging the men down the main street. There's nothing more humiliating than losing a tug-of-war, because the winners are going like that, and the losers are being dragged down. They're completely out of control. And I thought this was wrong somehow. They were all barefoot. I had commando boots on. So I got a hold of the end of the men's rope. And I dug in my heels, and we stopped the women. And then we started to drag them down the street. And then I thought, that's not fair either. So I let go, and I got onto the end of the women's rope. And anyway, and that's all there is to the story. But it was just the sweetest evening and the most innocent fun to do in 1958 in a Burmese village. There I'm pretending to smoke, but I wasn't actually smoking, because there's no smoking there. That's in Burma. In Burma, we drove up. We got permission to drive only during daylight hours, because there was wars going on then, and there's still wars going on in the very same areas of the Shan states. We were going to cross over into northern Thailand, and which we did. We drove down into a river and up the other side. That was the border. We had no visas or anything like that. And in the Thai village, which is Chiang Rai, not Chiang Mai. Many of you have been to Chiang Mai. It was Chiang Rai, which is north of Chiang Mai. Army captain, nice young army captain, asked to see our passports. And he said, I'm afraid I'm going to have to hold on to these. He said, you may not realize this. This is one of the most sensitive parts of the whole planet. It's very, very dangerous. He said, you've just come through a war zone. We knew that. He said, rate those close hills there, all that forest. That's the Golden Triangle where most of the world's heroin comes from and opium growth. And now a lot of it comes from Afghanistan, but that was the center of it then, and it's all full of drug lords and everything. The distant horizon is the People's Republic of China, enemies. And closer to that, because Thailand was allied with America, closer to that, those closer hills is where the Kuomintang are, which was Chiang Kai-shek's, part of Chiang Kai-shek's army when he lost to Mao, came that way and were being warlords in those hills. He said, this is a very dangerous part of the world. We don't know who you are. You might be drug dealers. You might be spies. You might be enemy agents. We don't know. So we're going to have to send your passports down to Bangkok with a policeman. It took him 2 days on a bus to go down to Bangkok and checked us out, and 2 days to come back. So we're there for 4 days. And he said, there's a barricade on the other side of the village. We know you can drive around it in your Land Rover, but if you do, we'll have to chase you. And we don't want to chase you. We said, that's fine. We don't want to be chased either. And so we had wonderful 4 days of enforced sort of house arrest in this village. We climbed up to the hills with the Miao tribesmen. You can see the typical stuff some of the kids are wearing. These are not considered to be proper Thailanders by the Thailanders. And I was doing paintings, possibly this painting. They were still wearing, and maybe they still are now, Queen Victoria silver coins, which is the only thing they really trusted. And so they wear them so they make sure they know where they are. Then we drove all the way down through Thailand, had 14 flats in 4 days, incidentally, but we were getting free tires from Dunlop, so we didn't want to buy a new tire. We got new tires in Malaya, not Malaysia. Malaya was British, and the communist terrorists before Vietnam were trying to take over Malaya. And the British army were fighting them, and we were entering a food prohibited area, and there was roadblocks everywhere. Well, Bristol and I were parked in the Land Rover on the streets of Kuala Lumpur waiting for the post office to open, and Bristol looked out the window, and here was this British army captain walking by in the 22 SAS. That's the Green Beret equivalent, the crack paratroop types. And Bristol looked out the window and said, Peter Fairclough, what are you doing here? And Bristol Foster, what are you doing here? They went to high school together, another one of those stories. This was UTS in Toronto. And Peter said, if you guys can wait around, we're having a big mop-up operation, if you can picture Malaya, kind of long blob. There's one main road down the west side, and the middle was totally untouched. No logging, nothing had ever gone on, and these little golden-skinned people lived there. And they were going to do a big mop-up along the road, try to get the communist terrorists, but meantime, they're going to go behind the mountains and be in the forest waiting in case they came over, if you follow me. I've talked about it long enough. But so Peter Fairclough spoke to his colonel and said, I got these 2 young Canadian boys. Could they fiddle a ride with us in the middle of the Malaya? And the colonel said, I didn't hear a thing you said. And so well, you can see here, that's me in the foreground in front of, dressed up as a British Tommy. We didn't carry any guns or anything, of course. And they had sent their paratroopers down into the rainforest and dynamited a couple of holes and then built bamboo platforms. You can see the helicopter on the closest one down at the bottom there. They're big Sikorskis. Very early days of helicopters, 1958. And then we set up camp in the forest. This is the camp commander. And we're looking at one of the maps there. And we're all under canvas or tarpaulins, sleeping in hammocks. And all around the camp, because the enemy could, of course, sneak up on us at night, and all around were tripwires and flares to go off and sharpened stakes to fall onto and pits you'd fall into. And so it was high security. And I then, as I do now, raise your hand if you are the same. I have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. And don't raise your hand. So I got up to go to the bathroom out of my hammock, and I stepped to the perimeter, and I cracked a twig. All around the camp, I could hear safety catches coming off. I said, okay, guys, it's just Bob having a pee. And so it was incredible. We took these little people with us. They call them Sakai, who are with us. They hunt with blowguns. Or they did. They're sort of related to the Dayak. And we stopped off at all the different little villages to tell them about watch out for strangers coming across the mountain and so on. And here I am doing paintings as usual. And then we went down to Singapore and sailed across to Australia. Australia, there's kookaburras, of course, and what they call galahs, meaning stupid. Those are rosy-breasted cockatoos. We landed at, as you could see on the map, landed at the northwest corner at either Derby or Broome, I get it mixed up, and drove right straight across the outback, halfway between Alice Springs and Darwin. Absolutely sort of unchanged Australia back then. Many of the Aborigines were still doing their ancient things they've been doing with that their fathers and grandfathers had done. This is an Aborigine guy with a woomera, a throwing stick. And there he is with an ancient stone tool, looks like our Stone Age. It could have been used by him when he was growing up, or certainly his grandfather, as his regular tool before they had steel. But now many of them are cowboys. So this is an Aboriginal cowboy, close-up of him. Saw that hole in the hat. At first I thought it might be a flaw on the slide, and then I didn't know what to do about it, whether I should Photoshop it in. But no, it's a bullet hole in his hat. He was probably looking at his gun when he was cleaning it. And Aboriginal art on the water towers there. Of course, everything's centered around water. They have what they call stations. We would call them ranches, only they're very, very big in the outback. I think they still are. I don't know if you know what a bison is. It's what an Australian Walshers is bison. Anyway, these are stations, which are big stations. And you open the gate in the morning, the only road across Australia. Open the gate, drive through, close it again, and drive until noon. Then you'd stop there, fill up on gas and your water, and maybe some beefsteak. And then you drive all afternoon, and at 5 or 30 at night, you'd open the gate at the other side and drive out of the station that way. This is a billabong. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing Once a Jolly Swag Man Can't Buy a Billabong, but that's what a billabong is. Kookaburras. And these, of course, are sulfur-crested cockatoos. And they just are like flowers in that tree there. And they're gathered around there, of course, because it's at a station where they have water. We went out in the Great Barrier Reef, and this is Bristol and I. It was wintertime. It was the end of August, toward the end of August. So it's wintertime. The water was kind of cold. We did a little bit of snorkeling, but we mostly just did reef walking, turning over stuff and looking at it. This is tube worms sticking out of some coral. So note the location of those tube worms. They're animals, of course, not flowers. And you wave your hand across it and scare them, and this is what it looks like. This is a sea cucumber. We got sea cucumbers here. I'm sure maybe almost within sight of the museum here. So they don't have a lot of personality. They're basically a slimy, leathery tube with a hole. They suck sand and stuff in one end, and it goes right through them and out the other end. In case you want to see its personality, I'll give you a close-up look of the face. That's the face, I think. And so they're not really the smartest game in town. And so I think we'd heard this, but Bristol decided to try to irritate it. It's very hard to irritate a sea cucumber. They get the message, and those ones in Australia, anyway, had an interesting defense. This extremely sticky mucilage glue, even though your hands were wet. And if you continue irritating it, it has an ace in the hole, literally. Its intestines. It squirts out its intestines. That's supposed to completely deter you. But the good news is they grow a new set. That's a nice thing about being primitive. If you don't irritate them anymore, they can completely recover. Well, Bristol stayed on in Australia for a while, and I sailed home. I had to get busy going to school to start teaching at Nelson High School. where incidentally Paul Gilbert, who many of you know and put the Bateman Center together, was one of my students at Nelson High School. I was going to start my new life in Burlington and saying goodbye. It was a big deal those days when an ocean liner took off. And here I am coming in. You might recognize that thing. It was there in 1958, and that's Stanley Park. Just thought you'd like to see West Vancouver in 1958, West Vancouver and North Vancouver in 1958 as we went under the bridge. Now under the bridge looking back, and that's me with the same jacket. Looks as if I lost a lot of weight on that corned beef hash. And having started with Me at the Rail, I'm going to end with Me at the Rail, and thank you very much, and Bristol's going to take over.
Well, good evening, everybody. I was going to wear my moose jacket too, but I thought it looked best on the original owner, so I didn't. Well, we went around the world for myself a year and a half, and I took about an hour and a half of movie, and I used this movie lecturing all over North America, as Bob said, for the Audubon Wildlife Circuit. And we were mainly lecturing to naturalists, Audubon Society. So we had lots of birds and mammals and insects, but not much of us. I mean, we were boring. We were just naturalists going around the world. But of course, we've changed a lot more than a egret has, or a kookaburra. So I don't have a lot of movies of us. But we'll show the movie anyhow. It's an hour and a half. I've cut it down to 20 minutes tonight, only African portion. And someday, before long, we may show the hour and a half movie, but not tonight. You may well say, thank goodness, it's getting on, isn't it? Yeah, so if we could please start the movie. It started. Oh, well, okay. So Bob, as you saw, is a great wave painter, and I think it's pretty tricky to paint waves because they're always moving. And we rounded West Africa, that's supposed to be West Africa, and past the green rainforest of coastal Africa, and landed at Takoradi, as Bob said, and drove ever eastward all the way to the Indian Ocean. So here's our first glimpse of Africa, which is incredibly exciting for a couple of guys from southern Ontario, Toronto, no less. So there's our hopes and future on one thin steel cable. If that broke, that'd be certainly the end of the trip. Well, we're off, driving along the road in Ghana. Chickens get the heck out of the way. And we did clobber, I must admit, a few chickens. The people are always waving, always friendly, uniformly friendly, gathering around us. There's Bob with Eric Thorne, who joined us for the African portion. Big crowd around behind us. I'm typing on the left. No, I guess it's Bob. And Eric painting on the right. And we'd wake up in the morning, and these faces would be looking in our bedroom. A real audience, the whole trip. India, Malaysia, same thing. Well, that evening before, we parked right in the middle of a thoroughfare. We didn't know that. But as the sun came up, people started coming past us, looking at us, wondering, who are these guys? What are they doing here? We started driving through the rainforest, which was really exotic for us. It's so rich. It's a biodiversity hotspot. Most of it's now cut down. But we did go to a place called the Bowbury Forest, not far from the coast, where research was going on, the birds, mammals, insects, and frogs, and so on. And here's Bob walking along innocently, and oh, he sees something.
I'm afraid of spiders.
Oh, look at that. A big spider, in fact, a huge spider. It's got a black and yellow warning pattern, and Eric sets up his camera, and Bob as well, filming the spider. Has a strong yellow web, strong enough to hold big insects and small birds. As we drive ever eastward, we get into the rainforest of Nigeria. It was rainforest almost the whole way, and kids crowd around us. Bob is holding on to a young hawk that we had, and here we're crossing the Niger River, a major river in Africa, and heading towards the Cameroons, another biological hotspot. There's our grizzly torque and a dugout canoe and then on the river. Bob painting Nigeria. And then we get into the Cameroons, which is hilly or maybe mountainous, and wend our way across the Belgian Congo to the White Mountains. Those are the Rwenzori Mountains on the equator, around through Uganda, over to Mount Kenya, Kilimanjaro, down to Serengeti, then down to the Indian Ocean, and over to India. So this is the Cameroons. It's still a very beautiful, variable spot, but unfortunately it's being logged, and a lot of the animals are being caught for bushmeat. Mamfe Road closed to all but four-wheel drive vehicles. We were thinking at one stage of taking a Volkswagen bus, but we're glad we didn't. We never would have made it. This particular road is the only one, unless you go way north towards the edge of the Sahara. And big power wagons drive through here with big wheels that are wider apart than a Land Rover. So we had to choose between one deep rut or the other. Fortunately, we had a winch, and we could tie a rope to a tree on one end and around the winch on the other, and the rope would slowly get tighter and tighter and tighter until well, the rope did break once, I must admit, but I edited that out. It did work this time, and we had to winch our way across most of that part of the Cameroons. It was one-way traffic, so we decided let's stop for a day, and I could take off the steering rod at the front of the Land Rover, hammer it on the cement bridge and straighten it out, and upstream a little bit was some children and adults, a couple of little boys washing the toes, well-washed toes. We saw lots of birds crossing the road, just glimpses of white-naped ravens and this and that, but we knew inside that dark forest there were a lot of animals that we just couldn't and didn't see. But we could imagine that there are all sorts of strange beasts in there. We wish we had more time to linger longer and look more closely, but we did have some luck. Well, this was one of the creatures we were hoping for, the three-horned chameleon, a master of many things. Look at its color, how it blends in with the leaves. They can change color. It's got the exact pale green of the leaves. The horns on the front it uses in fighting for a mate. It's got a long tongue that can shoot out and catch insects. Watch this in slow motion. Ready, aim, fire. We could hold these creatures on our hand. We could aim them like pistols around the Land Rover. And they were shooting, here's Bob shooting flies off our laundry. Driving along east of Cameroons is Afrique Equatoriale Française, and there's a bit of a party out in the road one day, and they were, again, very welcoming. I think they've been into the palm wine, but anyhow, we find the road covered with these animated cigars, which turn out to be millipedes. So it was lunchtime, so we quickly gathered some up. And you know, that latest fad nowadays is to eat insects, and these aren't exactly insects, and they have the disadvantage in having so many legs that you have to pick out of your mouth as you're chewing them down. But we were on a pretty Spartan diet, so they weren't that bad. French Equatorial Africa. Onward eastward, easter into the Belgian Congo. And that beautiful scene that Bob painted on the Congo River, which is an enormous river that crosses most of Africa from almost the Rwenzori to the ocean. Look at 5 people in this dugout. It's really tippy. At the Eastern Congo, we come to an area which really fascinated us. There are okapi being caught for zoos around the world, and these are the only living relative of giraffe. In a way, it's a forest giraffe. It's dark and fitting in with the dark environment, a beautiful animal. And the pygmies, who were doing the catching. Well, okay, we said, let's catch us some specimens for the Royal Ontario Museum. Here Bob is scaring them with a chameleon on his wrist, and they're all melting away. They hate chameleons because they got the evil eye, but we spoke to them about catching specimens, 1 cent each, and okay, off they go with their little bows and arrows, and then they wanted to take us with net hunting for larger animals than mice. So they pal into the Land Rover, more and more of them. They got their nets there. Another one. There's always room for another if you're a pygmy. And I think we had around 30 in or on the Land Rover. One on the roof, couldn't fit in anywhere else. We drove only a fairly short distance, then they led us off into the forest, and it was too dark to film inside the forest with old Kodachrome film, but they yelled and screamed and scared some animals into the net, and that was a successful hunt for them. In the meantime, small beasts were being caught for us to skin. So here's a mice on a little arrow. These little boys were deadly with their bows and arrows. And all these specimens had to be skinned because it's hot weather, and things rot in a hurry. So we said, oh, no more, that's enough, no more. We can't look after more. We had no refrigeration. And so we busily skinned rats and mice and bats and shrews, and they all reside now in the Royal Ontario Museum. Very happy-go-lucky people. They're often singing and dancing and playing games. And Bob, do you want to come up and here we'll do another? No. Anyhow, here they are playing hoop to hoop. Really beautiful people. So sad what they've been going through. We finally arrived at the edge of the Rift Valley at the eastern end of the Belgian Congo, and there we're beginning to get into big game country, and this is really one of the highlights of the trip that we were hoping to see. We crossed large lava fields, and Bob here is looking at the fresh lava flowing down to Lake Kivu, not showing you many large mammals. You know them all. You see so many natural history films on television. And we come to Rwanda. Urundi was called in those days, a double country. Now it's just Rwanda. Very high density of people, and the population growing quickly. Tall people, look, the feet even go down below. And then we get into Uganda. And the Grizzly Torque Land Rover now has got visitors, chimpanzees in one of the national parks. We're being observed. Here our laundry is being checked out. We put the laundry on the roof to dry out as we drove along. And Lake Edward, full of hippopotamus, and pelicans and storks and a volcano behind. It was just a naturalist paradise. We just couldn't believe our luck to be in a place like this. Yes, the rainforest of the Congo is beautiful, but it's so hard to see anything. So here's Bob photographing some egrets, and we were burning up lots of film on birds and mammals. Hammerkopf, a kind of stork. Fish eagle, so much more spectacular than ours. I just heard one. Did you hear it? Just grabbed a fish, and it's got white head, white tail, but it calls when it's flying. and it throws its head right over its back when it calls. This is a sunbird, one of many kinds of sunbirds. Sunbirds replace hummingbirds. In Africa, there are no hummingbirds outside of North and South America. So they're nectar eaters and insect eaters. So we're busily photographing them, trying to check them off on our list. In the background is mist, clouds, rain. It's the Ruwenzori Mountains. Ruwenzori meaning Risti. We're crossing the equator. Bob needs a haircut, so he's getting the treatment. A bit worried. And then we set up first in the long grass at about 5,000 feet elevation, with the misty mountains hiding behind. And yes, there are elephants in here, and potential other creatures like rhino. The trickiest part, though, was crossing these ice-cold, fast-flowing rivers, and it'd be awfully easy to fall in there. Nowadays, I'm sure they have a rope across, or else you aren't allowed to go at all, one or the other. Here Bob does his daredevil trick with his umbrella. At about 10,000 feet, we're in the zone of giant heather, 9 or 10,000 feet, and we have to jump from hummock to hummock to avoid the mud, which could be knee-deep. Then we're in the zone that Bob showed in his pictures of these giant cabbage-like plants called senecio, and also the giant lobelias, relative of which may be in your backyard. And up there at about 12,000 feet are these metal huts, and we could start a fire, start drying out, warming out, and it was pretty cold. The glacier was just up above us, so we thought, well, we have to get up to the glacier. I wonder if it's still there. First, we look at the plants on the way. Absolutely fascinating, amazing plants adapted to an unusual climate that is winter every night and summer every day, right on the equator. Lobelia. Different kinds of lobelia just found on Ruwenzori, Mount Kenya, and Kilimanjaro. Walking in front of the great blocks of ice at the edge of the glacier, we hope that it isn't going to calve off while we go there, because these giant chunks of ice, they slide down the side of the mountain, polishing the rock, falling into the valley with a thunder. So this trickle goes potentially 4,200 miles down to the Mediterranean. It and the Amazon are the longest rivers in the world. The Amazon has far more volume of water than the Nile River. So we head down and warm up and travel on into Kenya. Typical scene along the road, lots of people going by truck, very few private cars. Uganda has our alpine scene in the Ruwenzori, and as through Kenya we go past Mount Kilimanjaro, which is right on the dividing between Tanganyika, and Kenya, and down into Serengeti Park. First of all, through the Ngorongoro crater, 100 square miles of paradise surrounded by a rim, a volcanic rim. It's actually a caldera, and that was pure paradise. It was like the Taj Mahal in that there's so few people down there. And nowadays, it's different, to put it politely, it's different. Lots of wildlife then. You have all species of large mammal down there, except giraffe. They don't like walking down steep slopes. But these wildebeest and zebra and Thompson gazelle and Grant gazelle and impala and so on. Lots of species, lots of lions, about 500 hyenas, so as one census showed, and the black rhino, the rarest of all. And it is a beautiful specimen, and I'm sure there are just a lot of greedy people who would love that horn and could make hundreds of thousands of dollars from one horn. They're in a bad way these days with too many greedy, ignorant people. Tick bird's on its back. They're picking the ticks off the rhino, but also are the eyes of the rhino, because the rhino has poor eyes and the tick bird has good eyes and gives warning to the rhino. These Thompson gazelle and the Serengeti are running in slow motion and are jumping across the road. It's obviously the dry season. The rains haven't come yet to turn everything bright green and bring down the hundreds of thousands of wildebeest from the north. The bat-eared foxes, very cute with huge ears that are very sensitive to any insect noise or a moving rodent. And the Maasai with their cattle. They crowd around to look at us curiosities, and they're handsome, rather haughty pastoralists. And the woman, she comes too. She's looking at the paintings on the side of the Land Rover. She's not too keen about the camera. But that's, as we leave Tanganyika, we go back briefly to Kenya and the 1 million plus flamingos at Lake Nakuru, just north of Nairobi. Well, that was just amazing for us young bird watchers from Toronto to see anything like that. And they're still there. Lions, well, it's just another lion. Yes, sometimes they come right up to the Land Rover and lie in the shade on a hot day, right next to the Land Rover. So we leave Kenya now, after a very brief visit, as far as this film is concerned, and head across to India. So this film, an hour and a half long, will be upgraded. It'll be sent to a Montreal lab and put through a process to increase its quality. It is, after all, 58 years old, and it'll be shown eventually somewhere, sometime. Just one last thing. I wonder, we have a new owner of the Land Rover. Could Stuart please stand up? Stuart Longhair, he's the... He doesn't want to be known as the owner. He wants to be known as the custodian. In other words, he'll make it available to the Bateman Foundation, etc. And the master craftsman, Alan Simpson. He's absolutely an amazing guy. And there's the Land Rover that Stuart found, with me on the left and Alan on the right, as it was a month ago. Now it's all torn apart. It's just had it sandblasted to get all the paint off it, so it's shiny, bright aluminum. Now the engine's out, and well, it'd be nice to have Alan up here telling us about it, but it's a lot of work, and it's going to take another few weeks, probably, a few months. So thank you all very much.
We promised you adventure, we promised you the magic of nature, and did these guys ever deliver? Thank you very much. That was fantastic. Who knew when you bought the tickets you were also going to get singing, and you were going to get bird sounds and a recipe on how to eat millipedes and so on? So yeah, we got our money's worth for sure. In a moment, we're going to go upstairs. I'm going to continue this adventure by looking at the wildlife photographers exhibit. We're going to have a drink. If you want to get an autograph or you want to meet these inspirational gentlemen, you can do that. So we're going to do that in 1 second. Final note, I want to talk a little bit about this that you all found on your seat when you came in. The Bateman Foundation, of course, is a not-for-profit charity. We are attempting to do what we've done tonight, I hope, is connect people with nature, to inspire people to the magic of nature. It's through education, it's through events like this, civic engagement, and that's what we're trying to do. So we're hoping you can look at this and look at the back of this thing. We would appreciate, the Bateman Foundation would appreciate anything that you can do to help make this exhibit what we want it to be. We just gotta, you know, the movie's an hour and a half. Bob never met a microphone he didn't like, so his stories would keep going if we, and there's so much to tell in this exhibit. So so the Bateman Foundation is hoping you'll think about contributing to make this exhibit happen. It's going to open in May through October across the street. Then the intention is it and the Land Rover are going to travel throughout British Columbia, telling the same stories to other people like this. So thank you very much. We're head out these doors, up the escalators, and the night continues. Good night.